Hello, I'm Chase Blasik, an Asia Pacific analyst at RANE. This podcast is brought to you by RANE Worldview. Subscribe today at stratfor.com.
Welcome to RANE's Essential Geopolitics podcast. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about the Gulf Arabs stepping up to invest in Egypt as rising fuel and food prices strain the budget and the economy. Here with details is Ryan Bohl, Senior Middle East and North Africa Analyst for RANE. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
Can you set the stage a little bit? What's behind the price shocks and why would Egypt be so vulnerable?
So Egypt, like many countries, is exposed to fluctuations in food and fuel prices caused by the war in Europe, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which we've talked about lots with other areas. But Egypt is particularly vulnerable because not only is it energy poor, it has very little oil reserves or natural gas reserves that it can exploit for its own economy. It's also heavily dependent on not so much agriculture per se. They're a major agriculture producer, but what they're reliant on is cheap agriculture. There has been a long-standing Egyptian social contract where the Egyptian government subsidizes the cost of bread for the poorest parts of Egypt. And in exchange, Egypt's poorest people support the government. They don't carry out protests and strikes. This is a long-standing Egyptian tradition going back a very long time. And it is a threat when food prices start to increase. And it's more importantly, it's a threat at this moment because Egypt is restructuring its budget, its spending, in order to make it a more competitive economy. So they're trying to cut down on the amount of money the government spends so that there's more money in the economy to invest and improve productivity. And subsidies are a major part of that restructuring. Well, if the price of wheat is going up at this exact moment, just as they're cutting back on subsidies, it's a double whammy for Egypt's poorest.
Well, Ryan, how are Gulf Arab states stepping forward to support Egypt?
So what we've seen so far is billions of dollars in aid in investments from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. And they're investing in Egyptian fertilizer. They're talking about investing into Egypt's electricity sector. What they're looking to do is to offset the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, while at the same time bringing some returns home to their capitals as part of their own economic diversification strategies. We have to remember, before the war in Europe broke out, Egypt was seen as one of those countries that was doing a pretty good job reforming its economy and its national budget. It was seen as a place that could eventually, throughout this decade, be a major source of growth. So the Gulf Arabs are not only providing economic support, they're also trying to build on the momentum that Egypt was having ever since it started its austerity program in the mid-2010s.
So, Ryan, we are talking about Egypt, which is in its own unique situation, but could this kind of support come to other countries, say perhaps Syria, Lebanon, Jordan?
So it's a good question, whether or not the Gulf Arabs are suddenly deciding that they are being generous again. The answer is probably not. Not every country has the same strategic value to the Gulf Arabs as Egypt does. Egypt was perhaps arguably the center of the Arab Spring. It is still the largest Arab military power. It's the largest country by population. It really matters its stability to the Gulf Arabs, who are concerned that if unrest or instability starts to happen in Cairo again, it could create political ripple effects that would affect their own societies and could upend the geopolitics of the region, similar to the way that the Arab Spring did in 2011. And of course, the Arab Spring was partially fueled by higher food prices, by the poor being unable to afford basic necessities. That's what helped cause it. And so they are very aware that that if they do not provide some sort of aid to Egypt, they risk repeating that history. And that's not the case with other countries. Syria is still they might be normalizing in the case of the UAE with Syria, but they're not in a position where they believe that they need to provide Syria with any aid to stabilize it. Syria is still fighting its own civil war. So Syria probably won't be seeing a Gulf Arab bailout. Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are still actively involved in combat there, although we have seen a humanitarian ceasefire over Ramadan starting to be implemented. That's more of an attempt for the Emiratis and the Saudis to extricate themselves rather than finding a new sense of generosity towards Yemen. Many of the countries that simply aren't strategically important to the Gulf Arab countries are unlikely to get aid. So, but that being said, there's at least one other country that could be facing similar problems with their food and fuel prices, and that's Jordan. And Jordan is a country that does matter to the Gulf Arab states because it's a fellow monarchy, because they have a long history of providing it with economic support, because they're concerned that if the monarchy is destabilized, they could create space for political Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood, to start to take hold in Jordan and then inspire unrest in Gulf Arab states themselves. So if there is another country that is similar to Egypt, that both is exposed to the price shocks in wheat and fuel, and is also likely to get a bailout from the Gulf Arabs because of its strategic value, it would be Jordan.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was great analysis.
Thank you, Emily.
Ryan Bohl is Senior Middle East and North Africa Analyst with RANE. You can find his work in RANE Worldview, which offers objective geopolitical analysis and intelligence covering the global landscape. Get a great deal when you subscribe today. Go to strat4.com for details. That's strat4.com. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks for listening.